Hi, guys. So I think I get the next 8 minutes or so to entertain you with Bibblio. So let's try to have some fun, shall we? First of all, there is a clicker. So at Bibblio, we've basically built a recommendation engine. In very simple terms, when a user arrives at a content platform, it tries to figure out what content that user should be presented for. But I want to sort of take one step back, actually, because recommender systems are quite invisible. But it doesn't mean they're not important. So really, for 500 years, publishing has been about distribution of content to people. But now we all live in a world where we have more content in our pocket than sort of we could consume in a lifetime, or more like 100,000 lifetimes, right? So this is the discovery problem, or rather, it's sort of like a filtering problem. And actually, we all interact with recommender systems every day, but we might not really think about it. So if you go to Facebook and you load up the news feed, right, that's a recommendation engine. If you go to YouTube, if you go to Instagram, to Netflix, all of these platforms essentially have a content recommendation system at their heart. I just add a little fun fact here. We actually now, as a civilization, spend over 10 billion hours a week on these 4 platforms. Facebook is still the biggest one, but the other ones are catching up quite quickly. Now, a large part of that consumption comes as a result of the recommender engines. Not all of the companies release facts, but someone like Netflix have recently stated that about 80% of consumption on the platform comes via the recommendations, not people coming in. So essentially people browsing around and finding recommendations for them. All of that you see on Netflix is essentially personalized to you, right? So the recommendations you're getting are different from what another user would be getting. So what does Bibblio do? Well, we kind of help normal publishers, websites, content platforms, that also want this kind of technology, but unlike Netflix, they might not have 200 data scientists and machine learning engineers sitting, and someone like Netflix is spending $250 million a year on content recommendation. So we kind of think of it as a wheel that every single website in the world that has content is going to need. And if everybody needs a wheel, sometimes it's easier to build a wheel factory. So that's basically what we did at Bibblio. So instead of like a black box, we basically build a system that tries to make publishers get more out of the traffic they already have. They already make content. They already spend a lot of effort getting people to their site, but wouldn't it be great if they could just get 10% more out of that without having to change anything else? That's essentially the premise of good recommendation. So they sit kind of around the sides here, side panels, bottom panels, sometimes inside the content. And the reality is that most traffic these days come to websites directly from Google or Facebook or social media, straight onto an article or a video. And so they kind of bypass the homepage, or as we say, every page is now a homepage. You have to essentially optimize every single page to get the most out of your content. That's what Bibblio does. Some of you guys may have seen things like this, right? Recommended from the web, and typically, they're run by 2 companies, Tabitha and Outbrain. They are recommendation companies, or they call themselves that, but they also insert ads into it. That's where Bibblio is a little bit different. We essentially work with the website's own content to make more out of that. We don't stick in random ads, and as you can see, they're not always super related to what the user was reading about. So whether we should even call them recommendations is a discussion for another day. But essentially, it's a plug-and-play AI for recommendation and personalization. You can drop a code on the page. We go and read the article. Then we have a natural language processing system that works out the relationship to other articles. And then we basically look at all the behavior, and if you want the user's behavior on top of that to personalize and to make those results even more relevant. And I just thought it's worth giving you guys a little bit of an example here of what the engine does. So this is one of our clients, iPolitics, and as I go through this, you'll see it. So the first thing we do is we read the article, and we generate a whole set of rich metadata around it. Essentially, it's not enough to generate tags. We essentially index the tags based on the relevance to the text. As you can see here, they kind of have different scores. Because we often end up in this situation where there's maybe 1 million content items, and we have, there might be 5,000 that has the tag politics, but which ones do you actually show? And then we have these simple kind of drag and drop modules that you can just put on the page, and about 5 minutes later, even less if you're on WordPress, then you can basically have recommendations on your site. And then you'll just see different examples of Bibblio here. Bibblio can look and feel any way publishers want. It's very important that we work in and look like their own environment. So they can basically do whatever they want with the module. They can even just use the raw API, like OpenLearn here. to essentially just pull content from Bibblio, but build it into their own website. So they're now fully in control of that experience. This is Business of Fashion, and the list goes on. Now, what is a good recommendation? I do want to spend 1 minute on that because it's not actually given. Most companies have this kind of black box approach. This is recommended for you, but you have no idea why. Bibblio's kind of built it a bit different. So we've built a number of different algorithms that our clients can essentially interact with as they want. So one is content-based, essentially related content. What we find as an example is if a user comes via Google search for a specific topic, it works really well to show them content that is related to the content that they actually entered the site on. So rather than your most popular or your newest content, it actually makes a lot of sense to also show the most related content from your catalog. Then we have sort of more behavior-based models, popular content, recent content. All of these things are things that doesn't necessarily rely on the metadata itself, but relies more on the behavior that we're seeing on the site. And then finally is sort of personalization. And I'm not going to touch too much on that. There's been two things happening in that recently. Of course, GDPR, which is changing quite a lot in that space. But also, I should say, we're a little bit sort of personalization skeptics. And it's a long debate, but what I would like to say is that the same person is not actually always the same persona. So one of the real dangers of personalizing is that we're sort of flattening who that person is across all of their different personas. Spotify is a great example. They begin to look at, as an example, you listen to very different music in the car versus in the gym versus at home, right? But it's the same account. So actually, one person is many personas in our world, and I think that's the future of personalization, to be honest. Then, of course, I wouldn't be standing here if it didn't really do anything for people, right? So we often say that fixing recommendations on your site and having multiple good modules recommending content is the lowest hanging fruit for most publishers at this point in time. Yeah, of course, if there is any publisher or anyone in the room that has a website with a lot of content, then we always welcome new people in the family. We're live on about 165 sites at the moment. We're growing in terms of the number of users. We serve about 90% month on month at the moment. So this is something that's happening, and it's happening across most of the websites that you guys interact with every day. That was it. Thanks for welcoming.